some places earn their reputation. The Devil's River is often described as one of the most beautiful rivers in Texas. And after spending 5 days on it, it's hard to argue with that assessment. Crystal clear spring water, towering limestone cliffs, incredible fishing, and some of the most remote scenery in the state combine to create a place that feels very different from the Texas most people know. But beauty isn't the only thing the Devil's River is known for. Its remoteness, unpredictable conditions, and challenging access have earned it the reputation as one of the state's most demanding paddling destinations as well. For this trip, our group would launch at Baker's Crossing and spend 5 days working our way downstream through roughly 23 miles of river before taking out just above Dandridge Falls. At normal flows, this section can be challenging. We launched at about a foot below what is recommended. This is going to end up making parts of the trip significantly more difficult. The journey through the Devil's River starts long before the first paddle stroke. For most of us, this trip had been months in the making. Flights were booked, gear was packed, and every conversation seemed to circle back to the same question. What was waiting for us out there? When I asked Brad what he was most excited about, his answer was simple.
Not sure. Everything.
Honestly, that pretty much summed it up. After making our way across Texas, we settled in for the night at the Who Cares B&B, a place that feels perfectly at home in this corner of the state. As the sun dropped lower, distant thunderstorms rolled across the horizon, lighting up the vast West Texas landscape. There was something fitting about it. The weather was putting on a show, and tomorrow, the real adventure would begin. We were all in anticipation, as we knew that at 7 o'clock the next morning, local guide Gerald Bailey would pick us up and shuttle us to the river. From that point on, there'd be no turning back. Just 5 days, 20 plus miles of water, and one of the wildest rivers in Texas. Tomorrow, we launch. The next morning came early. As the first light crept across the Texas landscape, roosters announced the start of the day, and the desert was already coming to life. Even a jackrabbit seemed determined to see us off. Today was launch day. Before we could reach the river, there was still work to do. Boats had to be loaded, gear had to be secured, and everything needed to fit on the trailer for the 45-minute drive with Gerald to Baker's Crossing. For months, the Devil's River had been something we talked about, researched, and planned for. Now, it was finally becoming real. Baker's Crossing serves as the gateway to the Devil's River for many paddlers. Standing here, looking at the map and the river beyond, it was hard not to feel a mix of excitement and respect. Once we pushed away from shore, we'd be committed to the journey ahead. A few moments later, the boats were in the water, and the trip was officially underway. The first paddle strokes always feel a little bit different. The planning's over, the waiting's over, all that's left is the river. Less than a quarter mile from the launch, we were already ducking beneath a low bridge spanning the channel. It was a small reminder that the Devil's River has a way of keeping paddlers engaged from the very beginning. Have your head on a swivel. Beyond the bridge, the landscape began to open up. Water stretched ahead, distant mountains framed the horizon, and for the first time, we could start to appreciate just how remote this place really is. 5 days remained, but the adventure had finally begun. It didn't take long for the river to remind us why we'd come. One of the things the Devil is known for is its fishing, and Jason wasted little time putting a fly in front of one of its residents. In water this clear, every hookup feels a little more exciting. Of course, fishing was only part of the experience. Throughout the day, small chutes and rapids broke up the paddling, adding just enough excitement to keep us on our toes. The combination of crystal clear water, beautiful scenery, and willing fish made it easy to understand why so many anglers make the journey here. Around every bend, the river seemed to offer something different. One moment, we'd be quietly drifting through a calm stretch of water, and the next, we'd be threading our way through narrow channels like this one. The Devil's River isn't a river in the way most people think of a river. At low water levels, there's very little current pushing you downstream. Instead, it's a pool and drop system, a series of long, calm pools connected by rapids, chutes, and rock gardens. For the next 4 days, we'd spend our time paddling across water that felt more like a lake than a river, only to be funneled through narrow limestone channels into the next pool below. That evening, we reached our first campsite, a small island surrounded by clear water. After hours of paddling, a swim in the cool, spring-fed water felt less like a luxury and more like a necessity. With camp established, there was still enough daylight left to spend a little more time casting before settling in for the night. Trips like this are about more than the miles paddled or the fish caught. They're about the conversations that happen when the day is done, when everyone finally has a chance to sit down, relax, and enjoy where they are. As daylight began to fade, the first evening on the river came to a close with a simple campsite luxury, Jiffy Pop. Not a bad way to end day one.
All right, first paddle strokes of the day. Devil's River, day 2. Buckle up. Come on, baby. Come on. Oh, you little. Close, but no cigar.
That would end up being the story of our day. A lot of dragging, some fishing, and some really great scenery along the way. Day 2 is going to end up being our hardest day.
Oh, buddy. Ooh.
Nice.
Open up, baby girl. Gosh. Come on.
Daddy.
Ah. Come on.
Nice.
Yeah. Look at that.
Nice fish, man.
And by the end of it, we would earn that gourmet dehydrated meal.
Did you get him on?
Rage tail.
Oh, you got it.
I think I got it.
Nice fish. Damn.
It's going to end up being a long, hot day, and you're going to see a lot of this, because we did a lot of this. Dragging through rocks.
Some incredible scenery here on the Devils. It's putting on a show today.
One of the things that makes the Devil's River special is that every once in a while, the river rewards you for all the work. After another shallow stretch, we dropped through this little chute and into what felt like a completely different world. The water opened up into this deep emerald pool surrounded by limestone cliffs that towered hundreds of feet above the river. Places like this are why people put up with the heat, the rocks, and all the dragging. For a few minutes, nobody was in a hurry to go anywhere.
This is unbelievable. This is natural beauty at its finest. One of the coolest rivers that I've been on. In fact, this might be the coolest river that I've been on. Other than all the dragging. You gotta do a lot of dragging, but it all ends up being worth it. Let's see. Here we go. Oh.
With temperatures climbing and the next stretch of river waiting for us downstream, this seemed like a pretty good place for a break. The Devil's River is fed by spring, so even in June the waters stay cool and unbelievably clear. You can often see straight down to the bottom, even in some of the deeper pools. While a few of the guys kept casting, the rest of us took advantage of the shade and cold water. Moments like this are easy to remember. Out here the schedule is pretty simple. Paddle, fish, swim, eat, and repeat.
This is incredible.
After cooling off, it was time to get moving again. One thing that surprised me about the Devil's River was how much the landscape changes from one bend to the next. Around here, the canyon walls give way to these huge rounded hills that almost look out of place. The river cuts through part of the Edwards Plateau, a landscape shaped by ancient seas, uplift, and millions of years of erosion. It's easy to focus on the fishing or paddling, but sometimes you find yourself staring at the scenery. The farther we got from roads and crossings, the more it felt like we'd stepped into a different Texas than most people ever see. The overhangs and shelters carved into these limestone cliffs caught our attention all week. Archaeologists have found evidence of people living and traveling through this region for thousands of years. In a place where shade, protection, and water could be hard to come by, natural shelters like these on the right would have been valuable real estate. It's impossible to know who may have stopped here over the centuries, but it's a safe bet we weren't the first people to admire these canyon walls. We just happened to arrive with kayaks and fishing rods.
Climbing a mountain. Just a really cool stretch of river here. Had the wind at our back for about 15 seconds, which is always a bonus on the Devils, I've heard. And around every corner, even better scenery than the last.
At normal water levels, this probably would have been a fun little rapid. At 35 to 40 cubic feet per second, it became another portage disguised as a river. By this point, we'd started developing a system. Drag the kayak, find a deeper slot, float for 10 feet, then repeat. The sped up footage makes it look efficient. I can assure you it was not. The Devil's River has a reputation as one of the toughest paddling trips in Texas, and low water is a big reason why. You're a long way from help, the terrain is unforgiving, and every mile has to be earned. What's funny is at this point in the trip, I was still enjoying it. The challenge was part of the adventure. Ask me again about 6 hours later. For now, we just kept working our way downstream, one rock garden at a time.
About 6 more inches of water and you could probably run this. I am up to my waist. All right.
The scenery was incredible, but the Chihuahuan desert sun was still doing its thing. By late afternoon, I'd narrowed the list of exposed skin down to my hands, neck, and whatever part of my face wasn't covered by a hat or buff. At this point, sunscreen wasn't optional. It was survival equipment for me. One thing that kept morale high for some of us was the fishing. Even when the river was making us work for every mile, there always seemed to be another bass willing to cooperate for John. About the time he started focusing on the heat, the rocks, or the next drag, somebody would hook into one.
They in the ruts? They're always in this hole before we get in the game one rock. But the easiest way to do it is to get up here because you can wade all around this hole. It's really the channel.
Just wanted to show you guys the winds here. I was literally paddling as hard as I could and going backwards just a second ago. It's let up a little bit, but as you can probably tell, I'm a little strained here. We're close to night 2 and 3 camp.
At 6:01 in the evening, we were still on the water. What looked like a short paddle on the map turned into a long grind through headwinds and low water. That's something we learn over and over again on this river. Distance and time don't always mean the same thing out here. Somewhere ahead was our campsite and 2 nights in the same spot. But for now, all we could do was keep paddling. And that wraps up day 2 on the Devil's River.
Day 3 on the Devils. First paddle strokes.
After the marathon that was day 2, today was going to be a little different. Instead of packing up camp and pushing downstream, we had a full day to explore and recover. One of the advantages of staying put is that you start noticing things you miss when you're focused on making miles. The cliffs, the springs, the wildlife, and just how quiet this place really is. This section of river sits near Devil's River State Natural Area, one of the most remote state parks in Texas. Most visitors will never see it from this perspective. There are no roads down here, no overlooks, and no easy way in or out. For thousands of years, people were drawn to this river for the same reason we are today: clear water and an otherwise unforgiving landscape. And on a morning like this, it's not hard to understand why. Even in this rocky landscape, life seems to find a way to grow wherever it can. The contrast out here is part of what makes the Devil's River unique. Delicate wildflowers growing among rocks, cactus, cliffs, and terrain that can look almost desert-like from a distance. Of course, some plants are a little better adapted than others. The prickly pear is everywhere out here, thriving in conditions that would make most plants give up immediately.
It was like a fluorescent, or it might have been even a colored garlic.
With a free day at camp and the hot desert sun bearing down on us, Brad and I decided to make a run over to one of the springs we'd seen earlier in the day. That meant swimming across the river, climbing out on the far bank, and following a short trail back onto the rocks. One of the things the Devil's River is famous for is its springs. All along the river, groundwater emerges from the limestone and feeds the crystal clear water that makes this place so unique. Some of these springs have been flowing for thousands of years. After a short walk, we found it. Brad was the first one to reach the water, and it was immediately obvious why this spot has become a favorite spot for paddlers. The water was ice cold, incredibly clear, and felt amazing after a couple days in the Texas heat. After filling the filter from the spring, I got to work filtering the water. The springs that feed the Devil's River originate from the Edwards Trinity Aquifer beneath West Texas. That groundwater slowly moves through layers of limestone before eventually emerging here. In some cases, the water coming out of these springs may have started its underground journey years or even decades ago. A few minutes later, mission accomplished. After 2 days of paddling, dragging kayaks, and soaking up plenty of Texas sun, cold spring water tasted pretty incredible. There's something satisfying about filling a bottle straight from a place like this. No taps, no coolers, no stores for mile. Just water flowing out of the same limestone country that has sustained wildlife, travelers, and native peoples for thousands of years. It's easy to understand why this river has attracted people for so long. That's about as clear as water gets. One thing that's hard to appreciate until you're actually here is the scale of these canyon walls. For thousands of years, people traveled through this country on foot and horseback, navigating some of the toughest terrain in Texas. Looking up at these cliffs from the water, it's easy to understand why the river became the natural highway through the region. It's also a lot more enjoyable when you're floating instead of walking. Back at camp, the wind still hadn't got the memo that we were trying to relax. Brad spent a good portion of the afternoon in an ongoing negotiation with his tent, and for a while, it wasn't clear who was winning. As the sun dropped behind the canyon, the wind finally started to ease and the river settled down for the evening. The Devil's River can be demanding, frustrating, and occasionally humbling, but moments like this are why people keep coming back. For one more day, we had front row seats to one of the most beautiful and remote places in Texas. The fourth morning on the Devil's River started the same way a lot of good camping mornings do, with coffee. After a full day of exploring, nobody seemed to be in much of a hurry. Jason handled quality control duties for the camp coffee.
Little percolation there. For, yeah, bro. Push.
Fortunately, it passed inspection.
I think that's why they're so effective.
With camp packed up and coffee doing its job, it was time to get back on the water. One of the things I kept thinking about on this trip was how long people have been traveling through this country. Archaeologists have found evidence of human activity in the Devil's River region dating back thousands of years. Long before ranches, roads, or kayaks, people were hunting, gathering, and moving through these canyons. The river was life out here. It provided water, food, and one of the few practical routes through an otherwise rugged landscape. Later, this country became part of the Texas frontier. Soldiers, ranchers, traders, and native tribes all moved through the region, and not always peacefully. In 1857, a fight known as the Battle of the Devil's River took place not far from here when a U.S. cavalry patrol led by future Confederate General John Bell Hood clashed with Comanche warriors during a brutal expedition through West Texas. Standing on a battlefield and paddling through it are two very different experiences, but it's interesting to think about the history hidden among these cliffs. This is one of the springs feeding the Devil's River. You can often spot them by the clear water, different color, or the way they seem to appear right out of the rock. These springs are one of the main reasons the river remains so clear even during dry periods. The water coming out of them has spent years filtering through limestone underground before finally reaching the surface. For the people who lived and traveled here centuries ago, springs like these would have been prized locations. In a landscape where water can be scarce, knowing where a reliable spring was can make all the difference. Not everything we ran into out here was a fish. This little guy is a nutria, a large semi-aquatic rodent originally brought to North America from South America for the fur trade. They're excellent swimmers, although this one seemed perfectly content to let us drift by before making a slow and somewhat unimpressed exit. Not long before this shoot, we spotted a feral hog on the bank. As we approached, I suggested that John go first and show me the best line through the rapid. John immediately pointed out what I was actually doing was volunteering him to test it because I didn't want to go first because that hog had been standing there. To be fair, he wasn't entirely wrong. Fortunately, unlike much of day 2, this section actually had enough water to be fun. The Devil's River has a reputation for being unpredictable. At higher flows, some of these chutes become fast-moving rapids. At lower flows, they can turn into long, dragging sessions. Catch it at the right level, and you get stretches just like this one. The river itself is where the name Devil's River comes from. One popular explanation is that early travelers found the country so rough, isolated, and unforgiving that they believed only the devil himself could have designed it. Early Spanish explorers knew it as the San Pedro River, or St. Peter's River. But, as another wives' tale goes, in 1848, Texas Ranger Captain John Coffee Hayes led an expedition through this rugged canyon country. After fighting his way through the steep ravines and nearly impassable terrain, he reportedly looked around and said, "St. Peter, hell, this is the Devil's River." More than 175 years later, after dragging kayaks through rock gardens and battling headwinds, I'd say he had a point. Still, when the water's flowing and the chutes start linking together, this is the version of the Devil's River everyone hopes to find. This was much closer to what I'd imagined before the trip started. Of course, the Devil's River wasn't about to let us have too much fun in a row. Before reaching Dolan Falls, we were back to dragging kayaks through another shallow stretch next to the waterfall. At this point, we become surprisingly efficient at it. Not necessarily good at it, but efficient. This is where the low water really changed the experience. Dolan Falls is a mandatory portage, no matter what. But at these levels, there was a lot more exposed rock than normal. Instead of a straightforward launch, every kayak had to be lowered down by hand, worked through the limestone shells, and carefully slid back into the water. Dolan Falls is generally considered the largest continually flowing waterfall in Texas, dropping roughly 10 to 15 feet depending on water levels. The falls are named after Texas Ranger Captain Pat Dolan. In 1873, a fight between the Rangers and Native Americans took place near here, adding another chapter to the long history of this canyon. What's really wild is people have been using this area for thousands of years. Archaeologists have found pictographs, stone tools, middens, and other evidence of prehistoric camps near the falls and surrounding springs. Standing here today, it's easy to understand why. If you were traveling through this country centuries ago, reliable waters and springs like these would have been worth their weight in gold. Any place with moving water usually gets a few casts. The fish didn't seem particularly interested in cooperating, but nobody was in much of a hurry. Places like Dolan Falls have a way of making you slow down and spend a little extra time taking everything in. It's also one of those locations that nearly every Devil's River paddler remembers. Whether they remember it fondly often depends on how much water happened to be flowing when they got here. One thing low water definitely changed was the portage. Normally, paddlers are still careful here, but the reduced flow exposed a lot more rock and made getting boats back into the river a little more awkward than usual. Every kayak and canoe had to be lowered by hand, maneuvered through the rocks, and carefully launched below the falls. It's not especially technical, but after several days on the river, every extra lift feels a little heavier than it did on day one. Historically, this area has been both a landmark and an obstacle. Travelers moving through the region had to contend with the same geography we were dealing with today, just without lightweight kayaks, dry bags, and GPS units. At least we knew there was a cold drink waiting back home. Meanwhile, Jason decided that carefully lowering a kayak wasn't exciting enough. After confirming the landing zone was safe, he demonstrated a much faster way to get back to the river. Style points were awarded. From below, you get a completely different perspective of Dolan Falls. Even at lower flows, it's easy to see why this spot has become one of the icons of the Devil's River. The limestone ledges, the clear water, and the canyon backdrop make it one of the most photographed locations on the entire trip. If you're paddling the Devils, chances are you're stopping here. As we left Dolan Falls behind, it was hard not to think about how different this place can look from one year to the next. At flood levels, water can roar over these limestone shelves with incredible force. Jason actually told a story about a time when he came, I think it was his first time here, and there was high water flow, and somehow their wires got crossed, and he actually went over the falls in a canoe, and the canoe broke in half. During droughts, much of the rock sits exposed like it did during our trip. Same river, completely different experience. One thing that surprised me about the Devil's River was how quickly the scenery could change. A few bends earlier, we were surrounded by sheer limestone walls. Now we're winding through reeds and trees that almost make it feel like an entirely different river. The Devil's has a reputation for being wild and remote, but it's also incredibly diverse. Springs, pools, rapids, canyons, wetlands, and thick vegetation can all show up within a relatively short stretch. It's one of the reasons every turn feels like you're discovering something new. And then, just when things start getting peaceful, the river reminds you why you brought a kayak. The Devil's River has always had a reputation for keeping travelers humble. In the late 1800s, soldiers, ranchers, surveyors, and stage routes all struggled with this country. Water was precious, distances were deceptive, and the terrain had a habit of turning simple trips into difficult ones. More than a century later, we were dealing with many of the same problems. The only difference was that our complaints were considerably less justified. Perched high on the hill to the left is one of the most famous private properties on the river, owned by famed tobacco attorney and ranch owner Bill Parrish. Not a bad view to wake up to. Before long, we arrived at one of the better known rapids on this stretch of the river, 3 Tier. Bill's house actually overlooks this. At normal recreational flows, 3 Tier is generally considered a class 2 or 3 rapid, although the exact character changes quite a bit depending on water levels. For the first time in a while, everyone was paying a little closer attention. As usual, John volunteered to go first and show us the line. Brad and Jason followed in the canoe, Corey was up next, and I brought up the rear, which, depending on how things went, meant I'd either benefit from everyone else's scouting or get to watch all their mistakes first.
If he gives us 1 whistle, it's bad. If he gives us 3 whistles, it's good. Yeah, one whistle is good, 3 whistles is bad. 3 Tier.
With everyone safely through, it was finally my turn. From upstream, rapids always look a little bigger than they do once you're committed. The trick is to pick your line, trust it, and keep paddling. One thing the camera never quite captures is how much the water moves around and underneath you. Little drops feel bigger, the current feels faster, and every rock suddenly seems much larger than it looked from shore. At some point during the run, the GoPro apparently decided my life jacket was the most interesting thing happening on the river, so I skipped some portions here. Fortunately, the rapid itself was more cooperative than the camera angle. After spending so much time dragging boats through shallow water, finally getting to run a series of actual rapids felt pretty rewarding. This was the kind of paddling we'd been hoping to find all week, and the kind that I'd never done before. Proof that I made it through. Always important to have independent verification.
Yeah, buddy. Yeah, buddy. Good job, man. I think Brad got a video.
One thing I loved about this trip was how often we'd stop paddling just to look around. From water level, the canyon walls seem to rise forever. It's hard to appreciate the scale until you're sitting right in the middle of it. Not a bad place to take a break. This stretch of river passes through some of the most spectacular scenery on the entire trip. High above the canyon rim sits that ranch I talked about, owned by Bill Parrish, one of the attorneys who became famous during the massive tobacco litigation settlements of the 1990s. If you've got to build a getaway, there's certainly worse views to choose from. There's an old saying that the Devil's River is one of the last truly wild rivers in Texas. After spending several days out here, it's easy to understand why. The Comanches called this region home long before Texas existed. Later, soldiers, ranchers, outlaws, and adventurers all passed through this country. Paddling and standing in these canyons, it's one of the few places in Texas where it doesn't take much imagination to picture what it might have looked like 200 years ago. By this point, the river was finally giving us the kind of paddling we've been hoping for all week. Clear water, fun chutes, towering canyon walls, and just enough current to keep things interesting. No roads in sight, no houses except the occasional ranch high above the canyon, just water, rock, sky, and whatever waited around the next bend. As day 4 continued, we'd eventually find one of the best campsites the entire trip. By late afternoon, we reached what would be our final campsite on the river. One of the things that makes the Devil's River special is that the campsites aren't developed campgrounds. You won't find picnic tables, electrical hookups, or reservation signs out here. Instead, you'll find places like this. A granite island surrounded by some of the clearest water in Texas, with canyon walls catching the last light of day. After 4 days on the river, it felt like we'd earned it. Luxury accommodations were once again provided by a sleeping pad, a sleeping bag, and absolutely no roof whatsoever. Honestly, I had no complaints. By our last morning on the river, the weather had finally decided to cooperate. Cool air, a light breeze, and canyon walls slowly waking up with the sunrise. There's a strange feeling that settles in on the last morning of a trip like this. For days, your world shrinks down to a few friends, a kayak, and whatever lies around the next bend in the river. Then, suddenly, it's time to pack everything up and head home. The canyon doesn't care, of course. It'll still be here tomorrow, just as it was long before we arrived. Watching Jason make a few final casts before we left, it was hard not to appreciate how rare places like this had become. For a few days, we traded schedules for sunrises, traffic for current, and screens for canyon walls. The people who traveled this river centuries ago probably came here out of necessity. We came because we wanted adventure. But somewhere along the way, I think both groups discovered the same thing. There's something about wild places that keeps calling people back.
First paddle strokes of the last day. Any closing thoughts, Jason? A lot of of good stories. It's been a trip.
Can we get a group picture one of them?
With the kayaks loaded one last time, we pushed off into what turned out to be the coolest morning of the trip. After days of heat, wind, and relentless sun, the cloud cover felt like a gift. The mountains looked bigger, and the water looked greener. The river wasn't completely done reminding us who was in charge. Even with better flows than we'd seen earlier in the trip, there were still plenty of rocks waiting just below the surface. In Devil's River terms, getting hung up on a rock for a few seconds barely qualified as a delay. Fortunately, much of the next stretch looked a lot more like this. By day 5, we'd finally found the version of the Devil's River we'd been hoping for. Enough current to keep things moving, enough water to run the chutes, and just enough rocks to keep everyone honest. The river spread across a limestone shelf here, creating dozens of little channels, drops, and waterfalls. One of the remarkable things about the Devil's River is how alive it feels. Springs emerge from nowhere, water pours over ledges, and every bend seems to reveal a completely different landscape. Even on the last day, it was still finding ways to surprise me. One of the better rapids on the lower river is Indian Falls. Compared to some of the challenges earlier in the trip, this one was exactly what you hoped for. Enough water to keep moving, a clean line through the rapid, and just enough excitement to make you pay attention. By the last day, we developed a healthy respect for the Devil's River. Not because the rapids were enormous, but because the river was constantly changing. One bend might be a deep emerald pool, the next might be a boulder garden. Around another corner, you'd find a spring, a chute, or a canyon that looked like it belonged in another state entirely. That's part of what makes this place memorable. For thousands of years, people have traveled through this country for one reason or another. Native peoples hunted and camped here, soldiers crossed it, ranchers worked it. Today, paddlers come looking for an adventure. The river doesn't really care why you're here. It just keeps flowing through the same limestone canyons it's been carving for millions of years. And for a few days, we got to be a part of the story.
Hell yeah. That was awesome.
It's hard not to get a little romantic about the Devil's River on the last day, when the river starts feeding you rapids like this. A funny thing happened after a few days out here. The heat, the headwinds, the dragging, the blisters, the rocks, all the things that seemed important in the moment started fading into the background. What sticks with you are the clear pools, the canyon walls, the campsites, the stars, and runs like this. Funny how that works. The river wasn't quite finished giving out gifts. Not the biggest fish of the trip, but after several days on the water, any fish is a welcome fish. A quick photo, a quick look, and back into the river he went. The final miles of the Devil's River feels different. The canyons begin opening up, the river spreads out, the current divides into dozens of little channels weaving through reefs and limestone shelves. In some ways, this section felt like the river showing off one last time. Every few minutes there was another chute, another clear pool, another view worth stopping for. The Devil's River has a reputation for being difficult, and it absolutely earns that reputation. But that's only part of the story. It's also one of the most beautiful rivers in Texas. One of the clearest, one of the wildest, and one of the few places left where you can spend a few days without seeing much evidence of the outside world. That's becoming pretty rare. The Devil's has a way of collecting souvenirs, too. Not the kind you buy in a gift shop, but the kind you leave behind. A paddle nicked on limestone, a favorite lure buried somewhere beneath the current, a torn dry bag, a scraped shin. Nobody comes off this river completely unscathed. By the end of the trip, I donated 2 fishing rods to the cause. Somewhere out there among the rocks and rapids, they're still part of the river now. And somehow, that feels fitting. The Devil's River gives you unforgettable memories, but it usually asks for something in return.
Ouch.
By now we were getting close to the end. Somewhere downstream, beyond the next bends and channels, was Gerald's place, and the end of the trip. You always tell yourself you're ready for a hot shower, a soft bed, and a cold beer. And you are. But there's another part of you that wishes the river had one more day left. One more campsite. One more evening around a fire. One more morning with coffee and canyon walls. The funny thing about trips like this is that they rarely end when you reach the takeout. Years later, you'll forget exactly how many fish you caught. You'll forget what time you made camp. You'll forget how many miles you paddled. But you'll remember how this place felt. And somehow, that's the part that matters. As the miles started to run out, I found myself paddling a little slower and looking around a little more. Not because I was tired, but because I knew this was one of those places that doesn't come along very often. For 5 days, we'd travel through a landscape that looked much the same as it did centuries ago. The same limestone cliffs, the same crystal clear springs, the same winding canyons that challenged Spanish explorers, Texas Rangers, ranchers, and anyone else stubborn enough to pass through this country. Out here, it's easy to understand why people become obsessed with the Devils. It's not just the water, or the fishing, or even the scenery. It's the feeling that you've stepped into a different time. A place where cell phones don't matter, schedules don't matter, and the outside world slowly fades into the background. The river doesn't make anything easy. It tests your patience, it takes its toll on your gear, it makes you earn every mile. But maybe, just maybe, that's part of what makes it special. In a world where most adventures have become comfortable and convenient, the Devil's River remains stubbornly wild. And that's what I'll remember most. Not the fish we caught, not the rapids, not even the campsites. I'll remember the silence between paddle strokes, the sunlight dancing across water so clear it hardly looked real, the canyon walls glowing in the evening light, the feeling of being completely disconnected from everything except the river itself. Some places are beautiful. A few become a part of you. The Devil's River is one of those places. The adventure wasn't quite over yet. With the kayaks loaded, we climbed into Gerald's gloriously worn out F-250 and headed back through the ranch. From high above the canyon in the Blue Sage subdivision, we got one last look at the river we'd spent the last 5 days exploring. Somewhere along the ride, Jason handed me a Lone Star beer, which felt like a pretty fitting way to celebrate.
Out of the Baker section, Gerald, what's your favorite?
A few minutes later, Gerald's little Yorkie decided it was his truck, and we were all just passengers. Honestly, I think he might have been in charge the whole time. "5 days, a lot of dragging, some fish, a lot of laughs, and one unforgettable river." The Devil's River doesn't give you anything for free. You earn every single mile. But maybe that's why the memories stick around. Long after the bruises fade, the gear gets unpacked, and life returns to normal, the river keeps flowing through these canyons, waiting for the next group willing to answer the call. The river never asked us to be there. We were just lucky enough to spend 5 days in its world.